Check 1, 2.
Go! Curious about real estate? Yes! Then you've come to the right place. Get the knowledge you need. Get over the fear and get started. This is the Michael Quarles Real Estate Show with your host, Michael Quarles.
Hello, everybody. Michael Quarles with the Michael Quarles Real Estate Show. Today we have podcast number 190. We are getting close to 200. That's exciting to me. Today we have a scenario question, so I am going to try my best to answer it. Remember, if you have a scenario question or any other type of question, send it to support@michaelquarles.com. Also, if you want to talk about my coaching program and find out information about my coaching program, text the word investor to 313131, or you can go to the website and click on where it says coaching, and there'll be a form to fill out. You and I will have a conversation about the program, see if we're a fit for one another, and fall forward. Also, please use this. It's a great way to stay accountable. That's one of the issues that a lot of us have. It's just holding ourselves accountable to what we want to accomplish. If you need help there, then text the word wealth to the number 313131. It's going to send you a daily reminder and a form that you can fill out, send to yourself, that basically talks about what you want to accomplish tomorrow, what you accomplished today, what the struggles were, those kinds of things, kind of help you and to stay on track. And I'm getting some positive feedback. So again, if you're one of those people that just needs a little bit added security and encouragement, the security is, in fact, if you see it on a daily basis, there's security in knowing that if you see something on a daily basis, you'll start taking action to what you want to accomplish. And the idea that it just sends it to you automatically, I think is a great thing. So again, text the word wealth to the number 313131. Let's get into the scenario question. After discussing the terms with the seller, I made a subject to offer using the 3-page contract. So they're talking about my 3-page agreement. I have a 3-page agreement and a 9-page agreement. I like the 3-page agreement because if I'm dealing with someone out of state, so I'm not face to face with them or out of the area, the 3-page is easier to explain than the 9-page. The 9-page is more thorough and it has a lot more, stuff to it. And there are a lot more character closes, which is what I like about the 9-page. But the 3-page is adequate. So there's nothing wrong with the 3-page. So the 3-page he's talking about here. He followed up the next day and the seller stated that he was acting as a real estate broker without a license. And then he goes on to say, I think he did not like the assignment clause. How should I respond to this objection? Well, in some areas, you probably are acting as a real estate agent without a license. If you've done an assignment more times than the state maximum. I'm in California, so I know that's 8. So if we get above, 8 or more, then the state requires us to have a real estate license, or they're going to look to us as actually acting as a real estate agent without a license. And so that's a criminal offense. But under that, then we don't have an issue. Some states, vary in their amount of assignments that you can do. So I would find out my state requirement there and stay within it if I didn't have a real estate license. It's in the big picture of it. The reason we tell the seller that we're going to assign something is so we can be honest with them and forthcoming with them. I always want to tell a seller exactly what my intention is. And so my intention is I could assign it. I could flip it. I'm going to make a huge amount of profit, I hope, those kinds of things. I think it's just part of what we should do as real estate investors. Now, we do not need an assignment paragraph in a contract as long as our contract doesn't say we cannot assign it without the seller's approval. So if it doesn't say that, we don't need an assignment paragraph. So we don't have to get permission to do it because it's something that's granted to us automatically. And by putting like Michael Quarles and or assigns, it's not required. You can assign a contract. So as long as the assigning of the contract, you're not violating needing the agent law or agent license law, then you're probably going to be fine. So of course you always want to talk about legal stuff with an attorney, that kind of thing. I'm not an attorney giving legal advice. But let's look at this one a little bit deeper. If we have a seller who has a property to sell and they're not motivated to sell their property, then they're going to pick apart everything they sign. They're going to look for the reason to not do it because they're not highly motivated. They're looking for that thing that's going to say, yeah, I shouldn't do this. I knew I shouldn't do it, and this is telling me I shouldn't do it. Well, if that's the prospect, go kick them to the curb and go buy another house. Spend your energy on someone buying somebody else's house, because we can't buy them all. We shouldn't even expect to buy them all. We're trying to buy, a percentage of them, but that's it. My numbers over the phone are 2.88% right now. So think about that. 2.88% of the people that call in were buying their house over the telephone, never meeting the prospect. So I know if I can do it, you can do it too. So, figure out how many that you have to mail out, how many pieces you have to mail, how much pay-per-click you have to do, how much meeting and greeting you have to do, all those kinds of great things to get that phone to ring, and then just know your numbers. So track. But if you have a prospect that's not willing to play within your guidelines and sell their house, well, go buy somebody else's house. The reality is they need your money more than you need their house. And that's how you have to look at it. We're solving a problem for them. They're not solving a problem for us. So when we have a prospect that's not being willing, has a lack of willingness or not being forthcoming with true motivation, then just go buy someone else's house. It's okay. We're not supposed to buy it all. What I'm going to do, and I don't know how long it's going to take me. We're at like 6.5 minutes, 7 minutes right now. But I'm going to go through my 3-page agreement really quick and kind of point out some of the beautiful things within it. And I'm going to do this. It's crazy. My 3-page contract is going to be on michaelquarles.com. There's a little box that says, give me your name and your email. You give me that, it's going to automatically send back to you my 3-page contract. So if you want my contract, my 3-pager, that's all you got to do to get it. So let's go through the agreement really quick. So it starts out with purchase and sales agreement, and it says parties. So it's going to be a line for the seller. And so you're going to put their name in. The legal owner of the property, you should have already pulled up a property profile. You should already know who they are. So the seller and you, the person buying, your entity name, your mailing address, and your phone number. I think it's always important to put the phone number there, and in some contracts it's required. So let's put how they can get a hold of you physically and via the telephone. So the physical address. The reason the physical address is a requirement is in the case of doing like a short sale or something where there could be, in some states, the right of rescission or the right to cancel the contract. Then they require a physical address for the person that wants to cancel to give notice to. So you kind of have to have that. So let's just put it in there. And then underneath that, it talks about the property address is this, the city of, the state of, the county of, and then it has the APN, which is assessor's parcel number. The APN is not as important as the other stuff, but it is the most appropriate address to use. So it is the most legal address with the exception of the long paragraph that actually explains where that piece of property is on, a globe or the map, the area. The assessor's parcel number is better than the address that's given to it by the post office or by the county. But if you have one, you don't necessarily need the other. I use both because I have both all the time. Then the section 2 talks about financing. The purchase price offered is, and then it's an amount. And then I'm going to read you the next. Deposit to be held in escrow by company of buyer's choice. Deposit to be placed in escrow prior to closing of escrow in the amount of, and then put the amount. I like $100. You can put $1,000 in it. You can put $10. I like $100. That's enough consideration for me. The balance to close in U.S. cash certified or cashier's check, not including buyer's closing costs and subject to adjustments on prorations. It's either approximate or an exact amount, and you're going to put the difference. So if you're buying something for $100,000, you're putting $100 down, then the balance is $99,900. If you're buying it subject to and it's an approximate balance, so you're not exactly sure, you're going to give the seller $5,000 cash, so you're not going to do that. Then, you may want to go that and then an approximate balance of the rest. And then I have 3 checkboxes. I have if it's all cash, if it's seller financing, or if it's subject to, and then you attach addendums to that. And then the third paragraph is consideration and sufficiency. So that's making sure that the seller is aware that, yes, the amount that we're giving them is sufficient for them and the consideration is sufficient. So their promise to pay a deposit is sufficient to them. I have an appraisal contingency, and this one's important for us anyway, because we're buying properties based upon a value greater than the amount that we're contracted for. So I'll read it to you. This agreement is contingent upon a written appraisal of the property by a licensed or certified appraiser. The buyer will order and pay for appraisal on the property. The appraised value is less than, and then there's a space, which is the amount quoted by the seller as to what the house is worth in its as-is condition or after repair value. So you're going to check one of those. Buyer may, within 3 calendar days of buyer's receipt of the appraisal, at buyer's sole option, to declare this agreement null and void. Buyer is entitled a return of all deposits, if any, less the appraisal fee and other escrow expenses or fees chargeable to the buyer. Thereafter, neither the buyer nor the seller or any broker shall have any future rights, obligation, or liability under this contract. So basically what it's saying is, if I'm chatting with the seller and they say, my property's worth $100,000, but I'll sell it to you for $50,000, then I'm going to say, that's fine. I'm going to buy it for 50, but I'm going to have it appraised, and it must appraise for at least the 100,000. If it doesn't, then I have the right to cancel this. Typically, an appraisal contingency is only a contingency on the purchase price. I do not want this to be on the purchase price. I want it to be on what the seller says the property is worth. And again, I'm not trying to hide anything from the seller. I want them to realize I'm buying it for 50. They think it's worth 100. If it's not worth 100, I'm not giving them 50. So it's really a come to honesty kind of paragraph in here. So if the seller says, oh, wait a second, I was really kidding about the 100. I think it's probably only worth 85. Well, then I'm going to renegotiate my 50. So, it's up to the seller to be honest with us. And then section 5, which is closing date. The transaction shall be closed and the deed and other closing papers delivered in, checkbox, so many days following the date of this acceptance or on a specific date. So I typically put 60 days in that. So I don't place a date. I put 60 days or sooner, unless extended by other provisions of this contract and sales agreement or by written agreement of the parties, and also at the sole discretion of the buyer. So let me read that paragraph to you without explaining it during my reading. This transaction shall close and the deed or other closing papers delivered on so many days following the date of this agreement or a certain date or sooner, unless extended by other provisions of this purchase and sales agreement or by written agreement of the parties, and also at the sole option of the buyer. The reason at the sole option of the buyer is important to leave in is in the case of an abandoned property or a short sale.
Thanks for listening. We'll be right back. Are you running out of leads? It's time you tried Yellow Letters at yellowletters.com. Get motivated seller leads through yellow letters, postcards, zip letters, typed professional letters, greeting cards, door hangers, and business cards. Yellow Letters is a full-service marketing company created with your success in mind. Get the personal attention you need to get your direct mail campaign started and get in touch at yellowletters.com.
And we are back in 3, 2, 1.
So if I have someone that I had to find to sell me a property, or if I have a short sale situation where sometimes I know I'm going to have multiple extensions to closing, I don't want my closing company to have to require that both parties agree to the extension of closing. So my contract says I can, at my sole discretion or option, extend the agreement. So this paragraph, you want to make sure you explain to your closing company and make sure they can honor that paragraph for you, because it's an important paragraph if you're buying a property where you believe in advance that you may have extension requirements. Because a lot of times on a vacant property or an abandoned property and a short sale, those sellers don't want to be found. So if there comes a time that I need to extend something because I can't get it closed for whatever reason, and I can't find my seller to extend it, the escrow company or the closing company won't extend it. So I need to make sure that that's in writing, that they understand that provision and that they're accepting that provision. So I think that's an important part of the agreement. Paragraph 6, occupancy. Exclusive irrevocable possession and occupancy shall be delivered to buyer's assignees or buyer's agent at 5 p.m. on checkbox of the date of closing. At 5 p.m. at the date of the signing, or a checkbox on the date of closing, or a checkbox on a certain date, or a checkbox or no later than so many days after close of escrow. And then underneath that, it is if checked, property shall be vacant at least X days prior to close. And then underneath that one, it's if checked, property is intended to be rented or occupied beyond closing. The fact and terms hereof shall be stated herein. So let's look at that paragraph again. I'm saying that the moment I sign the agreement with the seller, I get exclusive, irrevocable possession and occupancy on a date. So my agreement is defaulted to the date the contract signed. I can put in something different. And the reason that I have exclusive, irrevocable possession and occupancy is in a case where, again, where I have a vacant or abandoned property or a short sale. I want to go in and be able to say to any legal entity, any government entity like the police, that I have the right to occupy, that I have the right to change the locks, those kinds of things. Because on a vacant, abandoned, or short sale property, again, the seller is trying to abandon it. They don't want the property, but I want to start securing it. I want to keep it safe for me. And so I need occupancy rights, and I want exclusive, irrevocable, so they can't take them back from me. They can't change it. They can't evict me during my contract to buy the property. I want to have that exclusive, irrevocable. It's very, very clear. And then underneath that, the first checkbox that says, if checked, property shall be vacant at least. I'd like 3 days. So I want it to be vacant 3 days prior to close of escrow. That means I can send another inspector, maybe my agent out there. Hey, tell me if it's empty. Tell me if it's free of debris. Tell me what it looks like, kind of stuff. Because if my terms of my agreement call for that property to be in livable condition at close and it's not, then I have to mitigate those costs or extend escrow for the seller to do those things. Now, in a case where the seller is going to occupy the property beyond my closing, that's what the last checkbox is, and I have an addendum for that they'll sign. And when we have them do that, we want to make sure that we charge them a per diem fee to occupy the property beyond closing, have that amount of money for 30 days held back inside of escrow or closing. So the seller doesn't ever have to pay it to us. They're just not receiving it. So as an example, say they're going to occupy the property for 5 days, because that's common sometimes where the seller says, well, I can't move until I get my check. And so I want to buy the property. They need my check in order to move. So I'll say, okay, I'll give you 5 days. The per diem rate is 3 times what the actual rent roll would be. So if the rent would be $1,000 a month, I'm going to look at a $3,000 a month cost. So the per diem rate, 30 into 3,000, that rate times, I'm going to hold back 30 days. Even though my agreement says 5, I'm going to hold into escrow 30 days. I want it to be harsh on the seller if they don't get out. Okay? Because if we just say, oh yeah, just pay me rent. You know, you can stay there for 5 days. That 5 days will turn into 7 days. That 7 days will turn into 14 days. That 14 days will turn into longer. But if they have a chunk of money sitting in escrow that gets to be remitted to them the moment they're out, then they'll move faster. They'll keep their word. And at the same time, I am making some money while they're still living in my property. So I think that's an important thing. Section or paragraph 7, condition of the property. Buyers buying the property in as-is condition. I always buy it in as-is condition. That's what we negotiate. That's how we advertise. I'm always buying it in as-is condition, and sellers like having that paragraph in there. And so we put it in there. And it's one of those things, anything said, anything agreed to verbally creates what we call a fraudulent contract. And it doesn't mean that fraud's taking place. What it means is that if it's not in writing, that one of the parties does not have to adhere to it. So if we have a negotiation with a seller and we say, yeah, I buy houses as is, and then we sign a contract that says they're responsible for the roof certification, or they're responsible for termites, or fixing this or fixing that, they can't come back to us and say, wait a second, you said, I have this postcard that says you buy them as is. Why are you charging me for that? Well, the reason is because our written agreement says that you're going to give me these certifications or you're going to fix these things. Well, in my case, I'm very explicit. In my marketing, I say I buy as is, but in my contract, I also say this is an as is purchase. You do not have to do anything to the property. Now, here's the caveat, or the little component that's important. In an as-is situation, you want to send somebody out within 3 days of your contract, or you do this yourself. And I have another form that is a contract walkthrough. So you walk through the property with the seller or a seller's representative, and you outline all of the conditions of the property. So it looks like crap. It looks like crap. It's okay. You're still saying, okay, bedroom looks like crap, bathroom looks like crap, living room looks like crap, whatever. And then 3 days before you buy it, you're going to take that same form out and make sure the condition has remained the same. Now, if it's gotten better, great. But that's typically not the case. If it's gotten worse, then you have to mitigate that getting worse. So even though we're buying them as is, we're not buying them as is the close of escrow or the close of the actual closing. We're buying them as is as of the date of our agreement. And that's an important part to understand in this stuff. I hope that makes sense. And then we get into the next paragraph, number 9. Buyer shall pay for all normal closing costs. Costs shall not include voluntary or involuntary liens against the property. So again, I advertise to the seller that I pay all the costs, and buyers pay all the costs anyway. Let's face it, it is. I mean, a lot of people think the seller pays real estate fees and all that kind of stuff. BS, because the buyer is paying that, because the buyer hands closing company or escrow the amount of money. The escrow and closing company hands that amount of money to the realtor and those kinds of people. Well, the seller's not handing them the money. I'm handing them the money. So I know I'm paying for it. So in this case, I'm saying I'm going to pay all the normal closing costs, but I am not going to pay, and this is an important part of the agreement, I'm not going to pay the involuntary and voluntary costs. So if they have a mechanics lien on the property, I'm not going to pay that cost because that's an involuntary lien. Or if they have a loan, I'm not paying that cost of paying that loan off because that's a voluntary lien. So I'm not going to incur the costs associated to the voluntary and involuntary liens. I'm only going to pay the costs of buying that house. And I think it's important to have that in there. That's 9 of 29 paragraphs. I thought I could get to it all. I can't. I apologize. This would be a friggin' long, I don't know, what are we at now? Let me look. Hang on. Let me see this thing. We are at, oh my goodness, 23 minutes. Let me take a couple more. I'll take a couple more here and we'll have to finish up on a different podcast. Item number 10, and this may not apply to you, but in my case, it applies. A principal with the buyer is a Department of California real estate licensee. An agency relationship between the buyer and the seller does not exist. Sellers should seek advice from their legal counsel prior to agreeing to the terms of this agreement. So the paragraph that should always be in your contract, in my opinion, should be the one that says seller shall seek or should seek advice from their legal counsel prior to agreeing to this terms or agreeing to the terms of this agreement. The paragraph that if it doesn't apply to you, so if you're not a real estate agent or broker, you'd remove that thing that says non-agency relationship, the principal with the buyer is a Department of Real Estate licensee. I'd remove that. But the reason I have that in there is, again, I want to let them know that I'm a broker. I'm a licensee, but I don't have agency. An agency, for those of you that aren't licensees, that is when you hire a real estate professional, and that relationship is called agency. So it's agency relationship. That means I'm working on your behalf to try to either sell something to you or sell something for you. In this case, I'm saying in advance, I'm a licensee, but I don't have that agency. So if you're not a licensee, paragraph doesn't apply to you, you remove it. But keep the one that says sellers should seek advice from their legal counsel prior to agreeing to the terms of this agreement. I think that's an important thing. Next one, which is 11, time for acceptance and effective date. The offer shall be deemed revoked unless the offer is signed by the seller indicating an acceptance, and a copy of the signed offer is received by the buyer on or before a date. So give your seller 3 days. That's the maximum amount of time. If in 3 days they don't agree, my offer is rescinded. I'm no longer willing to buy the property for this price. Because if you don't put a time limit to it, then, not that you have to agree, because just because someone signs your agreement doesn't mean you're going to agree to continue to buy it. But at the same time, you want them to know that there's a time limit to it. And so 3 days, I think, is fine. And make sure that they understand that I'm making you this offer for 72 hours kind of thing, and leave it at that. Item number 12, assignability. Buyer may assign this agreement. And again, that doesn't have to be inside of this thing, so you can remove it if you're uncomfortable with it. I'm not uncomfortable with it. I like the seller knowing everything we're doing, which was leading me to the next paragraph. Number 13 is resell. Seller is aware that buyer intends on reselling the property for a huge profit. All profits made by the buyer during this transaction relating to the reselling of the property are the sole interest and solely owned by the buyer. I'm telling them in advance. That's my intention. Is huge profits? Huge is capitalized. It's bolded. It's the biggest word on the page kind of thing. And I'm letting everybody know. Absolutely letting everybody know that my intention is to resell this property. I just think it's what we should do. I mean, think about it for a second. Do we really believe someone doesn't think that we're going to be making a lot of money on their house? Do we really believe that someone doesn't think that we're going to fix their house up or just sell their house to somebody else and make money on it? If the answer to that is no, that would be unreasonable thinking, that thought process would be unreasonable, then why not divulge it? Why not just be honest and say, hey, I'm letting you know? Because you know what? A lot of our peer group won't say it. And so if I have an investor out to a seller's house and they have told their seller or the seller that they'll give them $100,000 for the house, and then I go out to the seller and I start saying things like, let's go over the agreement that we're going to use today when I buy your house and when you sell me your house, which is our 2 embedded commands, really important. And then I get to this paragraph that says, now, I don't need to tell you these things, but I just think I'm supposed to. As a person, I'm supposed to tell you these things. A lot of people won't tell you. A lot of people will just try to, pull the blinds over you, and so you can't, recognize some things or don't know some things. I don't think that's my right. Now, legally, I don't have to tell you, but I'm talking my ethics and my morality. I don't think I should exclude these things. I think I should tell you about these things. And when I say those things to a seller, whatever that other investor said is out the window, because that investor wasn't honest. Because the first thing out of the seller's mouth is going to be, yeah, no one's ever said this stuff to me. I appreciate you being honest. And that's when you start being able to buy houses for less money, is when you're super honest, super professional. And, if you have that guerrilla mentality, who's going to get in your way anyway, right? It's just what it is. Item number 14, and this will be the last one. And it talks about typewritten or handwritten provisions. Basically what it's saying is, if I add anything to this agreement, so if I add another page, staple an addendum to it, or if I write onto this one, those have authority over what's typed on this page. So something that's handwritten upon or attached that's not handwritten is superior to this written. Because if we ever create a conflict in our agreement, we have to have a provision that says, in conflict, what portion of the agreement is more powerful. And in this case, I'm saying anything that's attached, anything that I write upon this agreement has more control than the typed part of the agreement. Because think about it, it was done afterwards. So meaning after the agreement was printed out or typed out and prior to signing. So provisions are important. And that was 14 of, however many I have. I'll get to another podcast and kind of close up on it. Sorry, I got off on it. I did not think I was going to get into the purchase agreement today. And this is my little 3-pager. And again, if anybody wants this agreement, just go to michaelquarles.com, send me your name and your email, and I'll forward it back to you. And it can't hurt to have. Thanks, guys. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Michael Quarles Real Estate Show. Get more info and stay in touch at michaelquarles.com.